All right, today we're tackling a really heavy one, a deeply controversial book from 1978 called The Iceman Inheritance by Michael Bradley. And let me tell you, it proposes a radical and frankly pretty disturbing theory about where Western racism, sexism, and aggression come from.
And boom, right out of the gate, Bradley hits you with this. There's no pulling punches here. This single sentence really sets the stage for his entire argument, and you can see right away it is provocative, to say the least.
So, Section 1. Let's really break down the foundation of this argument, what he calls his racist contention.
Okay, this is the absolute key to the whole book. Bradley isn't talking about culture. He's not talking about things we learn or choices we make. He is proposing that these behaviors are purely biological. He's saying it's in the genes, inherited from ancestors who survived the Ice Age. This premise is the bedrock for everything else he's about to argue.
So, when you think about our biggest global problems, nuclear war, pollution, Bradley's argument is that these are not humanity's problems. No, he pins them on what he calls peculiarly Caucasoid behavior. And that whole idea of progress, the drive to build, to expand, to dominate, he says that has nothing to do with intelligence or morality. It's just a unique and intense form of aggression, inherited and playing itself out on the world stage.
Moving on to part 2. So where does all this aggression supposedly come from? Well, Bradley introduces a psychological mechanism for it, something he calls the Kronos complex.
Now, this idea is pretty wild. You know how animals are instinctually territorial about their land? Well, Bradley suggests that when humans developed the abstract concept of time, past, present, future, they started treating time itself like a territory to be defended. And, he argues, this instinct took hold with a particular force in the white race.
So here's how he breaks it down. Step 1. You start thinking of time as a place you can own. Step 2. You get fiercely, territorially aggressive about it, defending your present. And step 3, the outcome? You get this relentless drive to outdo the past, which sounds a lot like what we call progress, doesn't it? And in a very strange twist, you start to see the future, even your own children, as a threat to your own identity.
All right, Section 3. So why would this Kronos complex be so much stronger in Caucasoids? This is where Bradley points his finger at a very specific and, you guessed it, highly controversial ancestor.
His theory goes like this. Only the ancestors of modern Caucasoids went through the evolutionary trial by fire of a glacial environment. It was there, he claims, that they evolved from and mixed with Neanderthals, and it was this brutal, frozen landscape that supposedly hardwired these unique behavioral differences into their DNA.
And check this out, because he completely flips the script on how we normally think about our ancestry. He's not saying Neanderthals were like Caucasoids. He's arguing the reverse, that Neanderthal genetics are, in his words, the mortar, holding the whole Caucasoid structure together, making it distinct from all other groups.
And this chart really lays out the two different paths he describes. On one side, you have the Neanderthal-Caucasian path, forged in ice, which he says leads to high aggression and extreme physical differences between men and women, causing all sorts of psychological and sexual conflict. And on the other side, you have all other races who evolved in warmer climates and, according to him, ended up with less aggression and more psychosexual harmony.
Okay, part 4, glacial maladaptation. Let's dig into how exactly the Ice Age was supposed to have forged these traits, and fair warning, this is where the theory gets very specific and very speculative.
Bradley's point here is that surviving the Ice Age wasn't just about inventing a better spear or a warmer coat. He says the cold was so extreme that it forced actual physical, biological changes in the human body. And these adaptations, he argues, had massive, unintended psychological side effects, especially around sex and reproduction.
So he paints this picture. To survive the cold, the male body becomes hairier and stockier. But more body hair means less skin-on-skin sensitivity, which kind of gets in the way of intimacy. So you've got this biological conflict between survival and sensuality. He claims this drove a wedge between the sexes, leading to these extreme physical differences, and that this physical gap created a deep psychological one too.
And this is where he brings in those famous prehistoric Venus figurines. You know the ones I'm talking about. Most archaeologists see them as symbols of art or fertility. But Bradley looks at them and says, wait a minute, what if these aren't symbolic at all? What if they're actually pretty realistic portraits of what women had to look like to survive and give birth in the ice?
And that's the big question he throws out there. He wants to challenge the traditional interpretation of this ancient art. Are we looking at a symbol? Or are we looking at a literal, biological snapshot of a prehistoric woman? It's definitely a provocative idea.
Okay, let's get to our final section, the Iceman's legacy. So, after all this deep dive into prehistory, how does this all connect to the world we live in today? What's the end game of this inheritance?
And here it is, the final twist in his argument. Bradley says that those very traits, that aggression, that relentless drive, that ensured survival back in the Ice Age, have now become a massive liability. In our modern, resource-limited world, what was once an evolutionary advantage has completely flipped. It's now, in his words, biologically inferior and maladaptive.
And here's how he connects it all to today's crises. That unchecked aggression? He says that's what's fueling our out-of-control technology and consumption of resources. That deep psychosexual frustration, that gets channeled into intellectual and religious violence. And racism and sexism? In his view, that's just a leftover echo from the Ice Age, a lingering sensitivity to physical differences. So his conclusion is pretty bleak. He's basically saying, the story is over. The tale of the Iceman is on its last telling. He predicts that the future will belong to people who don't have these conflicting elements in their biology. It's a prophecy of decline rooted not in politics or culture, but in genetics.
Ultimately, what do you do with a book like this? It's built on a foundation of racial theory and some very speculative science. But it does force us to confront a fundamental question. Is our aggression something hardwired into our biology? Or is it a product of our culture, something we can actually choose to change? Bradley has his answer, but his theory really leaves it up to you to figure out yours.